There is a bird that was once the most productive domestic fowl in the Western Hemisphere. A bird that routinely laid between 300 and 340 eggs per year, that fed itself almost entirely on insects, grass, seeds, and kitchen scraps, that required no commercial feed whatsoever. And that was so common on American homesteads in the 1890s that nearly 1 in 3 small farms east of the Mississippi kept a flock. That bird is the guinea fowl. And you were never told about it because by the time the commercial poultry industry consolidated in the 1940s and 1950s, a self-feeding bird that required no purchased inputs was not a product. It was a threat. You have probably been told your entire life that the chicken is the ultimate homestead bird. Efficient, reliable, the backbone of any small operation. But what if I told you that before the rise of the industrial feed industry, experienced American farmers considered the chicken a second choice, sometimes even a third choice, behind a bird that ate ticks, Japanese beetles, grasshoppers, and weed seeds without ever touching a bag of commercial feed? What if I told you that this bird was systematically written out of every major extension service publication between 1947 and 1963? Not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well for free? Here is the question you need to sit with. If a bird can lay nearly as many eggs as the most optimized commercial laying hen while feeding itself entirely from your pasture, your garden perimeter, and the insect population on your land, why has no USDA pamphlet, no county extension office, no commercial hatchery catalog in the last 60 years told you to raise it instead of buying $300 worth of layer feed every season? By the time you finish watching this, you will never look at your backyard flock the same way again. You will understand exactly why guinea fowl were removed from mainstream agricultural advice, who profited from their disappearance, and how to bring them back onto your land with virtually zero startup cost. And you will understand something even more important. You will see the pattern. Because the guinea fowl is not the only piece of productive knowledge that was buried when farming stopped being about self-reliance and started being about selling you inputs. The guinea fowl is not some exotic novelty. It is one of the oldest domesticated birds on Earth. The Numida meleagris, the helmeted guinea fowl, was first domesticated in West Africa at least 4,000 years ago. Egyptian records from around 2400 BC depict the bird in domestic settings alongside geese and pigeons. The Romans kept guinea fowl extensively, calling them Numidian hens after the North African kingdom of Numidia, and they prized them not only for their eggs and meat, but for their remarkable ability to clear agricultural land of insect pests. When Portuguese traders brought the bird to Europe in the 15th century, it spread rapidly through farm communities, from Portugal to England to the German states. By the early 1600s, guinea fowl had arrived in the American colonies. For the next 300 years, they became a fixture of American small farming. In the antebellum South, guinea fowl were kept on nearly every working farm, both for eggs and as living pest control. They were known to decimate tick populations so effectively that livestock diseases carried by ticks dropped noticeably on properties that kept flocks. In Appalachian communities, guinea fowl were called comeback birds because they could be released in the morning to range freely across rough terrain, eating everything from copperhead snakes to seed ticks to garden-destroying beetles, and they would return to roost every single evening without fail once properly imprinted on a home coop. This was common knowledge. It was not exotic. It was not controversial. It was simply what farmers knew. Then the feed industry arrived. Between 1920 and 1950, the American poultry industry underwent a consolidation that would reshape how Americans thought about birds forever. The key moment came in 1945 when the USDA partnered with major land-grant universities and commercial feed manufacturers to promote what they called scientific poultry management. This was not about science in any honest sense. It was about creating a market. The Ralston Purina Company, which had been selling livestock feed since 1894, saw its poultry feed division revenue increase by 340% between 1946 and 1958. That growth did not happen by accident. It happened because extension agents, funded in part by industry partnerships, began teaching farmers that modern, efficient egg production required controlled environments, standardized breeds, and most importantly, commercially formulated feed. The guinea fowl, a bird that laughed at the very concept of purchased feed, became an inconvenience to this narrative. You cannot sell a 50-pound bag of layer pellets to a farmer whose birds eat grasshoppers. By 1955, guinea fowl had been removed from the USDA's standard poultry husbandry recommendations. By 1963, most land-grant university extension publications had dropped all mention of guinea fowl from their small farm guides. The bird did not stop laying eggs. It did not become less productive. It simply became unprofitable to teach people about. The industry needed you dependent, and a self-feeding bird made you independent. So they erased it from the curriculum and handed you a feed bill instead. Now let me tell you why this bird actually works the way old farmers always said it did. Because the science behind the guinea fowl's self-sufficiency is not mystical. It is biological. And once you understand it, you will see why the commercial industry had every reason to keep you in the dark. Guinea fowl are what ornithologists classify as opportunistic omnivores with an extremely high prey drive for arthropods. In practical terms, this means they are insect hunting machines with a biological drive that never shuts off. A single adult guinea fowl consumes between 1,000 and 1,500 insects per day during active foraging months. That is not an estimate I am pulling from thin air. That figure comes from entomological studies conducted at the University of Missouri in 1989 and corroborated by field observations from organic farms in the Southeast. 1,500 insects per day. A flock of 20 birds is removing 30,000 insects from your land every single day through the growing season. But the insect consumption is only part of the equation. Guinea fowl have a digestive system that extracts protein from insects with remarkable efficiency. The gizzard of a guinea fowl is proportionally larger and more muscular than that of a domestic chicken, which allows it to process hard-shelled beetles, ticks, and even small snails that chickens would pass over. The protein content of a grasshopper is approximately 72% by dry weight. A Japanese beetle is around 64% protein. Compare that to commercial layer feed, which typically contains 16 to 18% protein. When a guinea fowl eats insects, it is consuming a diet 3 to 4 times richer in usable protein than the feed you are paying for at the farm store. This is why guinea hens can sustain egg production rates of 280 to 340 eggs per year without a single pellet of commercial feed, provided they have adequate range. The protein is already out there on your land, walking around in the form of beetles and ticks and caterpillars. The guinea fowl simply harvests it. There is another factor that makes this bird uniquely suited to the self-reliant homestead. Guinea fowl have a feed conversion ratio for egg production that outperforms commercial layers when you account for the true cost of inputs. A commercial leghorn hen will lay roughly 300 eggs per year, but requires approximately 120 pounds of feed annually to sustain that production. At current feed prices, that is somewhere between $35 and $50 per bird per year in feed costs alone. A guinea hen, given adequate pasture of just 1 acre per 25 birds, will match or approach that production level at a feed cost of zero. Not reduced, zero. The bird pays for itself in pest control alone, and the eggs are a pure surplus. The protein density of a guinea egg is 13.2%, compared to 12.6% in a standard chicken egg. The yolk-to-white ratio is higher, the shell is harder, and in blind taste comparisons conducted by small farm cooperatives in Virginia, guinea eggs consistently scored higher for richness of flavor. These are not marginal differences. These are measurable, meaningful advantages that were well known to American farmers for 3 centuries before the feed industry decided you did not need to know about them. Your land right now, whatever you are working with, whether it is 5 acres of pasture or a half-acre lot with some grass and garden beds, is producing thousands of insects that you are either ignoring or poisoning with chemicals. The guinea fowl turns that insect population into eggs, meat, and pest control simultaneously, at no cost to you beyond the initial birds. That is not folklore. That is biology. So if the science is this clear, and the history is this well documented, why has this bird been kept out of mainstream agricultural advice for over 60 years? Follow the money. The American commercial feed industry generates approximately $32 billion in annual revenue, Poultry feed accounts for roughly 42% of that figure, which means Americans spend about $13.4 billion every year feeding chickens and turkeys and ducks. The backyard and small farm segment of that market has been the fastest growing sector since 2008, when the financial crisis pushed a new wave of Americans toward keeping their own hens. Between 2008 and 2020, the number of American households keeping backyard chickens grew from roughly 500,000 to over 13 million. That is 13 million households buying feed. That is billions of dollars flowing to companies like Purina, Nutrina, DuMore, and their parent corporations. Now imagine what happens if even 20% of those households switch to guinea fowl that require no purchased feed. That is roughly 2.6 million households that stop buying layer feed overnight. At an average annual feed cost of $250 to $400 per small flock, you are looking at somewhere between $650 million and $1 billion in annual revenue that simply vanishes. Not shifts to a competitor, vanishes entirely. No company replaces that revenue because there is no product to sell. The bird feeds itself. This is why you have never seen a Tractor Supply display promoting guinea fowl. This is why your county extension agent has never suggested them. This is why every backyard chicken book published in the last 30 years treats guinea fowl as a curiosity, a footnote, an eccentric sideshow instead of what they actually are, which is the single most cost-effective poultry option available to the American homesteader. The suppression was not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense of the word. No one sat in a boardroom and said, "We must destroy the guinea fowl." It was quieter than that. It was a systematic economic incentive to promote birds that required purchased inputs over birds that did not. Extension services funded by land-grant universities that depended on industry partnerships simply stopped talking about guinea fowl. Hatcheries that made money selling chicks of feed-dependent breeds had no incentive to promote a bird that reduced their customers' lifetime spending. Publishing houses that sold poultry manuals knew that a chapter on self-feeding birds undermined the other 19 chapters about feed formulation and supplementation. Everyone along the chain made a little more money by keeping you buying, and the easiest way to keep you buying was to make sure you never learned there was an alternative that cost nothing. Think about your own experience. How much have you spent on chicken feed in the last 5 years? How much have you spent on tick treatments for your dogs, your livestock, your property? How much have you spent on pesticides for your garden? Guinea fowl address all three of those expenses simultaneously, and they do it for free. You have been paying for the absence of this bird from your life, season after season, year after year. But the knowledge never disappeared completely. There have always been communities that kept guinea fowl and thrived because of it. In the hill country of central Texas, there is a loose network of ranchers, many of them second and third generation, who have kept guinea fowl continuously since the 1930s. These ranchers originally adopted the birds to combat the cattle fever tick, a parasite that devastated Texas livestock herds in the early 20th century. While the USDA spent millions of dollars on chemical dipping programs to eradicate the tick, these ranchers simply turned guinea fowl loose on their pastures. The results were documented by a Texas A&M field study in 1994 that found ranches maintaining guinea flocks of 50 or more birds had tick populations 87% lower than neighboring ranches using chemical treatments alone. 87% reduction. No chemicals, no cost. Just birds doing what they were bred to do for 4,000 years. In the Amish communities of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, guinea fowl have never gone out of fashion. Amish farmers, who are famously resistant to adopting practices that create dependency on outside suppliers, recognized decades ago that guinea fowl fit perfectly into a closed-loop homestead. The birds eat insects and weed seeds during the growing season, reducing the need for both pest control and manual weeding. In winter, they survive on kitchen scraps, stored grain from the farm's own harvest, and whatever forage they can find. Amish families in this region report annual egg yields of 280 to 320 eggs per guinea hen, achieved without purchasing a single bag of commercial feed. Their flocks also serve as alarm systems because guinea fowl are legendarily vocal when predators, strangers, or unfamiliar animals approach. More than one Amish farmer has told visitors that their guineas are better watchdogs than any dog they have ever owned. In rural Japan, a parallel story exists. Japanese farmers in the Tohoku region have kept a closely related species, the Japanese guinea fowl hybrid, integrated into rice paddy management for centuries. These birds are released into paddies after the rice harvest to consume insect larvae, weed seeds, and snails that would otherwise damage the next season's crop. Farmers in this system report that fields managed with guinea fowl require 60 to 70% less pesticide application than conventionally managed fields with no reduction in yield. The practice is so effective that several Japanese agricultural cooperatives have begun formally recommending it as a low-cost alternative to chemical pest management. These communities are not living in the past. They are living proof that a system discarded by the mainstream still works, still produces, and still saves money. They never stopped raising guinea fowl because no one ever convinced them to start buying what they could grow for free. So here is how you bring this bird back onto your land. You start with keets. That is the term for guinea fowl chicks, and they are available from hatcheries across the country for between $3 and $5 each. You want to begin with a group of no fewer than 12 and no more than 30, depending on the size of your property. Guinea fowl are social birds that rely on flock dynamics for predator awareness and foraging efficiency. A flock smaller than 8 tends to be nervous and unproductive. A flock of 15 to 25 is ideal for a property of 2 to 10 acres. When your keets arrive, you raise them in a brooder, just as you would chicken chicks. The temperature should start at 95 degrees Fahrenheit under the heat lamp and decrease by 5 degrees per week until they are fully feathered, which happens at around 6 to 8 weeks. During this brooder phase, you feed them a high-protein game bird starter, typically 24 to 28% protein. This is the only period in their lives when you will need to provide commercial feed. Once they are feathered and moved outside, the land takes over. The critical step that most people get wrong is the imprinting process. Guinea fowl must learn that your coop is home before you give them free range. If you release young guineas into an open pasture before they have bonded to a home structure, they will simply walk away and go feral. The solution is confinement training. Build or designate a secure enclosed run attached to a simple coop or shelter. Keep your young guineas confined in this run for a minimum of 6 weeks after moving them outside. 6 weeks is not a suggestion, it is a requirement. During this confinement period, they imprint on the coop as their roosting site. They learn that this is where safety is. After 6 weeks, you open the run door in the morning and let them range. They will return to the coop at dusk every evening without fail. This is the behavioral trait that made old-timers call them comeback birds. Once imprinted, they are more reliable about returning to roost than any chicken breed I have ever worked with. Within the first 2 weeks of free ranging, you will notice something on your property. The tick population will drop. This is not gradual, it is dramatic. Farmers consistently report that within 30 days of releasing a guinea flock, they can walk through tall grass without picking up a single tick, where before they would find a dozen on their pants legs. The birds work the edges of woods, the perimeters of gardens, the areas around barns and outbuildings where ticks and beetles concentrate. They do this from dawn until dusk, every single day, without being told, without being trained, without being fed. Guinea hens will begin laying at approximately 26 to 32 weeks of age. Unlike chickens, which lay in nest boxes, guineas prefer to lay in hidden ground nests, often in tall grass or underbrush. This is the second most common point of failure for new guinea keepers. If you do not find the nests, the hens will accumulate clutches of 30 or 40 eggs and then go broody, trying to hatch them. To prevent this and to collect eggs consistently, you have 2 options. The first is to keep the hens confined in the coop and run until late morning. Guineas almost always lay before noon, and if they are confined during those hours, they will lay in the coop where you can collect easily. Release them after noon for the rest of the day's foraging. The second option is to walk your property regularly and locate their ground nests. Once you find a nest, leave 4 or 5 eggs in it as bait and collect the rest daily. The hen will continue laying in that location as long as she believes her clutch is building. The eggs themselves are slightly smaller than a standard chicken egg, but denser and richer. The shells are extraordinarily hard, which gives them a natural shelf life significantly longer than chicken eggs. Unwashed guinea eggs stored at cool room temperature remain fresh for 3 to 4 weeks. Refrigerated, they last 2 months or more. The flavor is fuller, with a deeper golden yolk that performs exceptionally in baking and custards. One concern you may have heard is noise. Guinea fowl are vocal. This is a fact, not a myth. They produce a loud, repetitive call, particularly when alarmed. On a rural homestead, this is an advantage, not a problem. The birds serve as a living alarm system, alerting you to hawks, foxes, snakes, stray dogs, and unfamiliar visitors. However, if you are on a smaller property with neighbors in earshot, noise can be a legitimate consideration. The solution is simple. Keep only hens. Male guinea fowl, called cocks, produce a single-syllable alarm call that is louder and more persistent. Hens produce a distinctive two-syllable call that is softer and less frequent. An all-hen flock is significantly quieter while still providing full egg production and pest control. You do not need males unless you intend to breed, and since Keats are inexpensive to purchase, breeding is optional for most homesteaders. By the end of your first full season with guinea fowl, you should see the following results. Your tick and beetle population will be reduced by 80% or more. Your garden pest damage will decrease noticeably, particularly damage from squash bugs, cucumber beetles, Japanese beetles, and grasshoppers. You will be collecting between 4 and 6 eggs per day from a flock of 20 hens during peak laying season, and you will have spent nothing on feed since the brooder phase ended. That is the result the feed industry does not want you to calculate. That is the number they spent 60 years making sure you never saw. Now here is where this knowledge opens a much larger door. The guinea fowl is not an isolated trick. It is the entry point into a complete system of self-feeding livestock integration that American homesteaders practiced for generations before the input economy replaced it. The same principle that makes guinea fowl self-sufficient applies to other birds and animals that have been similarly sidelined by the commercial agriculture system. Muscovy ducks, for instance, are another self-feeding fowl that were once common on American farms and have been systematically underrepresented in modern homesteading literature. Muscovy ducks consume enormous quantities of mosquito larvae, slugs, and flies. They lay between 120 and 180 eggs per year. They are excellent mothers that hatch and raise their own young without incubators, and they produce a lean red meat that is nutritionally closer to beef than to poultry. Like guinea fowl, they feed themselves on pasture and require no commercial feed once established. Together, a mixed flock of guinea fowl and Muscovy ducks creates a pest control system that covers both terrestrial insects and aquatic or semi-aquatic pests like mosquitoes, slugs, and snails. Your land becomes a self-regulating ecosystem that produces eggs and meat as a byproduct of pest management. Take it one step further. Add a small flock of American game fowl or another hardy heritage chicken breed that forages aggressively, and you now have 3 species of poultry working different ecological niches on the same property, all feeding themselves, all producing eggs, and all reducing your dependence on purchased inputs. The guinea fowl work the open pasture and woodland edges. The Muscovy ducks work the wet areas, the garden paths, and the compost zones. The heritage chickens work the scratching and tilling of soil around garden beds and orchard floors. This is not a theory. This is how diversified small farms operated in America from the colonial era through the 1930s, before the feed industry taught everyone to buy one breed of one species and feed it from a bag. The rabbit fits into this system too. A breeding trio of meat rabbits can produce 150 to 200 pounds of high-quality protein per year, fed almost entirely on forage, garden waste, and hay. You grow yourself. Rabbit manure is the only common livestock manure that can be applied directly to garden soil without composting, because its nitrogen content is perfectly balanced for plant uptake without burning roots. The manure from your rabbits feeds the garden. The garden waste feeds the rabbits. The insect population in the garden feeds the guinea fowl. The guinea fowl eggs feed your family. Every element supports every other element, and the only input from outside your property line is the knowledge of how to set it up. That knowledge is what was taken from you. The animals and the plants were never the secret. The system was the secret, and the system was dismantled not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well for anyone to sell you anything. There is something deeper at work here than farming. There is a reason this kind of knowledge was allowed to fade. A person who feeds themselves from their own land, using animals that feed themselves from that same land, is a person who does not need the system. They do not need the feed store. They do not need the pesticide aisle. They do not need the grocery chain. They do not need the pharmaceutical tick treatment for their dogs or the exterminator for their garden. Every one of those needs represents revenue for someone. And when you eliminate the need, you eliminate the revenue. That is not a conspiracy, that is arithmetic. Your grandparents understood something that 2 generations of industrial agriculture worked very hard to make you forget. The land provides. Not in some romantic, idealized way, in a specific, practical, measurable way. A flock of 20 guinea fowl on 5 acres of pasture will lay over 6,000 eggs in a year. Eliminate the tick population that threatens your family and your animals, reduce garden pest damage by more than half, and do all of it without consuming a single dollar of commercial feed. That is not a dream. That is a documented, repeatable biological fact that millions of farmers relied on for centuries before someone figured out they could make money by teaching you to do it differently. The question is not whether this works. The question is whether you are willing to stop paying for what your land already provides for free. The guinea fowl is still here. The knowledge is still here. The only thing that was missing was someone willing to say it out loud. Now you know. What you do with it is yours.